right, welcome you back to the Patrick Netherton Show right here on 1130 The Tiger. He's Rogers Hampton. I'm Patrick Netherton. We're pleased to welcome in lead LSU beat writer. As a matter of fact, his Twitter handle, at LSU Beat Tweet, for the Gannett News Service. He is the great Glenn Guilbeau, one of the longest tenured LSU beat reporters that there is. And his annual SEC coaches rankings came out. We'll get to that coming up in just a bit. We'll also tell you a little bit about the upcoming LSU-Mississippi State game. But first, Glenn, how are you? Everything okay? Family doing okay?
Good. Everything's great. Looking forward to some live football in Tiger Stadium.
Yeah.
Can't wait, even though not many fans.
No, it won't be a lot of fans, but it will be good to see SEC football back on the air. All right, so before we get into the actual game itself, give us some idea of what it's going to look like, not only from just the fan perspective. We know there's the seating is going to be limited, social distancing, all that, but also from game ops, from the media. How are y'all going to be handled in terms of this stuff? What's it going to look like for you covering an LSU game tomorrow?
Well, I think it's going to feel a lot like a spring game. As far as the attendance. But and there's going to be a Zoom teleconference after the game, which, we'll all be plugged into, so we won't be running down to the locker room. But, other than that, it's going to be about the same. I imagine they're going to pipe in some crowd noise. And I covered the Saints game in an empty dome.
Yeah.
And, after a while, you're just covering a game again, and this will be at least more like a game because there will actually be fans there. It's going to be funny because, they're going to be more emotional than the 25,000 you see in a spring game.
Well, sure.
So, yeah. And I think it's going to be an interesting game because I think Mike Leach is a heck of a coach.
Well, we'll get to that because you absolutely think Mike Leach is a heck of a coach. And spoiler alert for what's coming up here, or I guess a little teaser for what's coming up in just a bit. In terms of covering the game, obviously you'll cover the game itself, but do you have folks working on sidebars for attendance, for what the fans are dealing with? Can you even get to the fans to talk to them? Are you going to have some of that extra stuff built in, or is this going to be sort of a straight game coverage?
Well, I'm the only person there from my papers, but I'm going to try to talk to some fans for sure, and I'm assuming I'm going to see some fans on the way doing some secret tailgating or
right.
I'm going to see somebody somewhere, and you can always go in the stands. I've done that before. See what it's like, or you may see them in the concession areas, up and down the elevator. There's always some access to fans because they're in the suites too. It's I would think it's going to be a little different than your normal game coverage.
Yeah, I would certainly think so. Have you gotten used to? You've had a lot of them now. All the press conferences and everything, all the interviews are being done via Zoom now. But are you still running into issues with Zoom, or have you gotten comfortable with it and it's kind of second nature for you now?
Actually, Zoom makes it a little easier and it's more organized. It's not quite as natural, when you're talking to a guy in person, but it does make it a little easier. You don't have to get all the way out to LSU and then come back. You can just do it right at your desk there. So in that vein, it's more efficient. I think sometimes the players are actually better, when they're sitting there talking into a camera, because sometimes they might get a little nervous or too guarded when they're surrounded by reporters in person. So it's actually worked pretty good, I think.
Are there protocols for the media for the collegiate games? I know for the NFL, you all get tested and you go through all the protocols that everyone else goes through. But Are there protocols in place for the media when it comes to testing and that kind of thing before collegiate games?
Well, before the Saints game, they just took our temperature real quick, like when you go into the doctor's office or something right there at the gate. Now, the LSU is doing a little more involved testing. They've told us to arrive a little earlier where you get your credential, and there's it just sounds like it's a little more than just taking your temperature. So we'll see what that is. But it seems like LSU is doing a little more than Saints did. Of course, they have fans in the stadium, so that might be why.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense. All right, let's talk about the game itself, Glenn. You mentioned you're a Mike Leach fan, and we'll get into that here in just a bit with your SEC coaches rankings going into the season. But tell me a little bit about this matchup with so many unknowns for LSU in terms of personnel, guys that have left or guys that have graduated and moved on to the NFL. Is this a scary matchup, or do you look at it as, well, Mike Leach hasn't had a whole lot of practice time either. They didn't have a spring practice to go through, and LSU's at least ahead of the curve on that because the guys that are there are pretty well versed, and at least they're a reasonably veteran group, even if they haven't gotten a ton of playing time.
Well, LSU's definitely got more talent than Mississippi State. There's no question about it, and more speed. But I think the things that we would be talking about in a normal year that aren't true this year work to Mississippi State's advantage.
Okay.
Because, number one, you wouldn't be playing Mike Leach in the opener. He's been in Game 8 in a normal year. And a guy like Mike Leach, that's not somebody you want to start season against. Plus, you're at home, but there's only going to be 25,000. So that's a big advantage that LSU doesn't have. Plus, Mike Leach as a quarterback who started in K.J. Costello, a Stanford graduate transfer, he started 25 games at Stanford, which is 25 more games than Brennan has ever started.
Yeah.
I think those things make it kind of tough for LSU. Brennan's in his first game, but actually Brennan might be aided by the fact that it's not a full stadium. So he might be able to focus better and not be nervous. I mean, I wrote about that today. Sometimes Tiger Stadium can intimidate its own players, particularly the younger ones. So they won't have that to worry about. I see the point spread is about 17 or 18 points. I think it's going to be closer than that.
Yeah. Talking to Glenn Guilbeau, LSU at LSU Beat Tweet, if you would like to follow him on Twitter. Great follow, as always, for Gannett as the LSU beat writer, and also covers a bunch of Saints as well. All right, your coaches' rankings, which, by the way, the boys on after us love your coaches' rankings. They cannot wait every year until your coaches' rankings come out. Ben and JJ love to get out. You know JJ Marshall, of course. They love to get after your coaches' rankings. They're big on that. So you've given them fodder for today, if nothing else. But to me, the major surprise, and we kind of hinted at a little bit, was Mike Leach, and where you have him ranked vis-a-vis some of the other coaches that are in this league. You have him all the way up at 3. Tell me about why Leach is your guy for the 3 spot when he has been good, but I don't feel like ever really been what I would call great.
Right. Well, one of the things barometers I use a lot is how good the program is that he's at.
Yeah.
That's why I have Mullen ranked pretty high too, because he won at Mississippi State, which is a lot harder to do than most schools. And Leach has been at 2 of those type schools. He won consistently at Washington State and at Texas Tech. And Washington State, in particular, not known for a lot of winning football. In fact, there were 7 losing seasons out of 8 previously to Leach getting there. Now, he lost 3 straight years to start, but after that, he won pretty well. So that means a lot to me, and that's why Stoops is ranked so high, because he's been decent at Kentucky. Whereas Gus Malzahn is not that high. Jimbo Fisher I dropped a lot because he's not doing as well as he's only doing a little bit better than Kevin Sumlin, who got fired. that's one reason for that.
Do you buy into, and I noticed Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee is down there at 10th, do you buy into, a lot of people seem to think this is kind of the year Tennessee gets over that proverbial hump. They closed well last season, played well down the stretch. Are you buying into maybe this is the year Tennessee makes that jump and kind of gets into the thick of things in the East?
I've been hearing that for a few years,
right.
and it hasn't really happened. I'll believe that when I see it. And that Tennessee's a program that should have been doing better for the last several years. I think so. I don't think that's as difficult a job as, say, Mississippi State, but they haven't done well there. In fact, Lane Kiffin, his 7-6 there is as good as a lot of the other coaches he was before him and after him. But no, I don't know. I don't believe much in Tennessee quite yet. But he did do a good job finishing up last season. He started off 2-5 and ended 8-5. So that was pretty good.
Yeah.
And he's just starting out as a head coach too. And I tend to rank those guys lower when they're just starting out.
Well, and that was my next question, because Mike Leach, you've got a lot of first-year guys as head coaches in the league this year, but a guy like Eli Drinkwitz, a guy like Sam Pittman at Arkansas, these are guys who are not only their first year in the league, but Drinkwitz is his second year as a head coach, Pittman first year as a head coach. Is it hard to? Is it almost an automatic that, hey, these guys are going in the bottom couple on the list? Or can you look at maybe one of those younger guys and say, hey, this is a guy that I potentially thought, because of success that he had somewhere else or as an assistant, I thought about maybe bumping them up a couple of slots?
Well, if it's your first year in coaching, which it's not Mike Leach's. He's been coaching for 17, 18 years. But if it's your first year coaching, period, I usually start you out pretty well down there. And even Coach O, I think the first ranking I had for him might have been 9th or 10th.
Yeah.
Then 8th, then 6th, now 2. But yeah, you have nothing. You have nothing to really base it on if they haven't been a head coach yet. Even if they've been a great coordinator, that doesn't necessarily mean a lot either, because you just don't know.
Yeah.
So I usually put them low to begin with.
Did you have any debate putting Saban 1 or potentially dropping him to 2 or 3 or something like that?
No, no debate at all.
Okay.
He's been number 1 for a dozen years. I think for obvious reasons. Coach Joe had a great year, but that's just one national championship. Nick's got 6, and he's got 5 in a real short period of time. So I don't think when you're looking beyond a year or two, there's nobody close to him.
No, and I would tend to agree with you. Did Ed Orgeron, kind of the off season that he's had, we've seen, he was on 60 Minutes. We've seen kind of a whirlwind of both positive and negative publicity for Coach O. There was, a lot of the players going and being a part of a rally when they didn't even bother to tell him that they were doing it. That kind of opened his eyes a little bit. He's always been a football-focused guy, but now he's had to realize he has to focus on social issues and what his players care about. When you kind of evaluate the offseason, is there anyone that's maybe more relieved that we're just playing football now than Ed Orgeron?
I don't think he's any more relieved than a lot of coaches are. I think Coach O is very adaptable. He's not rigid in his thinking. I think that's one of the things that makes him successful. He realized Matt Canada wasn't doing well. Bam, he got rid of him before the season was even over, and then he had the guts to go after somebody like Joe Brady. He's open-minded in that way. So I think the players respect him. I don't think he's had any issues with the players. He probably would have liked if they'd told them they were going to protest.
Right.
But he also realized that this is extremely different times than usual, and I think he's very understanding of the players, and he's coached in a lot of places, and I think he understands what's going on there. So, no, I mean, I don't think he's had a rough off season. I don't see it that way.
Do you almost have to, when evaluating this team this year, do you almost have to just treat this as a completely different team in terms of, yeah, there's some holdovers from last year, there's some guys that played last year, but to me it's incredibly unfair to compare them to last year because of the confluence of events, Burrow and Brady and the receivers and everyone, and they stayed healthy and so on and so forth. Do you almost have to just wipe the slate clean and say this 2020 LSU team, it is unfair to compare them to the 2019 LSU team?
Oh, yeah, I would say so, for sure. I mean, you have to point out the differences in the team, but yeah, I mean, it's not like, and I mean, look, they're not ranked number one anywhere. Their highest ranking is fifth, and that's about where they ought to be, and maybe even a little lower. But if they were returning Joe Burrow and Chase and Jefferson, then they probably would be number one. So there'd be pressure on them, and they should be compared to that team. But they lost too many players and a key coach in Joe Brady to think they're having a chance to repeat. Whereas like the Saints, I mean, the Saints, the Saints could have been considered a strong repeat team after the 2009 Super Bowl team, because that was a young team still, and they kind of folded the next season. They were great the year after that, but LSU doesn't return enough of the players that were important and significant in that season last year to compare them. But I mean, I still think they're a really good team. I mean, they're still really talented on defense, and they still have a lot of what they had last year. Like Derek Stingley and Terrace Marshall from Shreveport, and they lost some offensive linemen, but they still got a really good offensive line. They still got some really good backs. So, I mean, really, the only real position question mark is quarterback. Because really, at receiver, they could be almost as good with Eric Gilbert, tight end receiver, and plus if Keyshawn Boutte develops, and they might even be better. I think they will be better on defense, because frankly, they had some games where they were really pretty average to bad on defense last year. You just kind of forget about it because they were so good on offense. But the biggest drop off obviously is Burrow to Brennan.
Yeah, and we'll see how that plays out. It's a pretty impressive weight to put on Miles' shoulders, and we'll see how he deals with it. All right, last thing, Glenn. Did you predict, or have you predicted the season yet? Have you given us, or are you giving us a win total for this year?
Yeah, I've predicted 9-1.
Mm-hmm.
I have them losing to Alabama, but I think that's the only team that's going to have it, a chance to beat them. I mean, they could maybe lose another game, but no, I have them right there at 9-1, and maybe Alabama will lose a game somewhere else too, or two. So I think it's going to be close in the West.
It's going to be if nothing else, going to be a wild season to follow. Whether they play all the games or games get canceled or postponed or whatever, 2020 is definitely going to be a season unlike any other to cover. Glenn, thank you so much for your time, brother. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Glenn Guilbeau at LSU Beat Tweet, LSU beat reporter for Gannett.